dangerous. For me and for many folks, coming out had a lot to do with sex. Having consensual, pleasurable sex for the first time was one of the most liberating experiences little me could have ever possibly dreamed of. It reminded me that my soul did in fact live inside my body, and the needs of my body were in fact the needs of my soul, that the liberation of my body was inherently tied to that of my soul's. But coming out and sex in general, especially in the early baby gay days, is kind of like dancing. Both easier for some, but terrifying for most of us. Misconstrued and as unnecessary and tied to sin to the religiously misguided, but in reality, both crucial to liberation and joy and integral to queer traditions of resistance. Once you get into the groove, once you strip yourself of shame, both become joyful, like your body's expression of the soul within. Thank God I came out. Thank God I had the love and support of a community around me to remind me that I was not wrong or bad and that I no longer needed to keep my secret. Thank God I came into myself. Thank God I realized that my spirit knew more about the universe than dogma, nationalism, and even religion itself. Welcome to New Day. Welcome to a place where we are working toward a moment where our little humans no longer have to feel that dread at night, where we want you to know that you are not wrong or bad and that your body deserves to be loved and cherished. And most of all, welcome to a place where we invite you to the terrifying business of dancing.
Thank you, Keisha. This is where you'd usually say, let us pray, but today I'm going to say, let us dance. Let our souls dance. Let us open our hearts.
Free to give me a little ear situation, and I'll get back on the mic. So good morning, everyone. Good morning. This morning, we're talking about the temples of our bodies. So let's start by taking a few breaths and coming into our bodies again. So let's all breathe together, in and out. Again, in and out. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel your seat in the chair. Just invite your body to fully arrive this morning and see how it's showing up. Get curious. What are the sensations? Get specific. What's tight? What's soft? What's moving? What's blank? And keeping that curiosity, take another breath and let your body answer the question, how is God moving in my body right now? See if you can let an answer come from somewhere below your thinking self. How is God moving in my body right now? Dear God of bodies broken and risen, sensual God, God closer than our skin, our breath, our heartbeat, God of sweaty palms and butterfly stomachs and achy backs. Open us this morning to the way you move through our bodies. Open us to our bodies as temples. Open us to the quiet voice inside calling us to aliveness. And And help us, God, to respond to that call this morning, even if just a little bit. Even if just a little bit. Amen. So in this view of bodies as temples, we, like Jesus, arrive at a temple that is in the midst of desecration. The temples of our bodies are in the midst of desecration. For the past several centuries, mainstream Christianity has not only lost sight of the sacredness of our bodies, but it has been the driving force behind our bodies' desecration. I grew up surrounded by a religion that put my body and my salvation in opposition. The body was something to be overcome in order to save the soul. I inherited the belief that bodies were sources of temptation and sin, that we had to stay constantly vigilant, fighting to keep our rational souls from being corrupted by the urges and desires of our irrational bodies. I learned early on that my body in particular was something dangerous. I was a queer kid growing up in a blue-collar Catholic community. I was born in 1988 as deaths from AIDS were rapidly on the rise with no end in sight. In a number of direct and indirect ways, I received the message that my body, specifically my sexuality and gender, would lead me down a path of isolation, of sickness, of death, of damnation. Unless I did everything I could to put my body under my mind's control. This theology imagines our bodies more as prison houses for our souls than as houses of God. In his book, Original Blessing, Matthew Fox, a former Catholic priest, he talks about the work of psychologist Carl Jung. He writes, Jung has written that there are two ways to lose your soul. One of these is to worship a God outside you. If he is correct, then a lot of churchgoers in the West have been losing their souls for generations. Preaching a God out there kills God and the soul alike. I approach it a little differently than Jung. For me, a transcendent God, a God that exists beyond me and beyond what I'm able to know, for me, that's a personally important part of my faith. But I think I agree with the point that Jung is getting at, which is that when an image of God beyond us is used to cut us off from the God within us and within our neighbors, an egregious act of spiritual violence occurs. And how apparent are the effects of this spiritual violence in this healthcare situation right now? My blood has been boiling that these 13 white Christian men get to sit in this back room and make some bill that will kick 23 million people off of their insurance, leave 23 million more people uninsured, in order to give massive tax breaks to the wealthiest 2%, to drug companies and to insurance companies. Thankfully, it becomes murkier and murkier about whether or not this will actually pass. But I just was moved again and again to tears at these videos all over Facebook. There was one of all of these disabled activists being carried out of Capitol Hill in their wheelchairs, being removed from their wheelchairs by the police as they protested cuts to Medicaid. And then so many videos of people looking the camera, or Even worse, looking their politician, their senator, right in the eye at a town hall meeting and saying, "This will kill me. If this bill passes, I will die." How deeply our society is soul sick, is overcome with sin. The temple of our bodies is in ruins, and we're being told to kneel at the altar of profit. But the good news, and there is always good news, the good news is that our God lives even in the midst of desecration. Our God lives. Our God lives especially in the midst of desecration. Our faith calls us into the work of daily resurrection. And by that I mean the daily work of encountering the living God in the wounded, in the cast aside, the broken, the margins, the forgotten, and that includes our bodies. The daily work of encountering God in our bodies, especially the parts of our bodies that we find shameful. No matter what you have been told about your body, by parents, by preachers, by partners, by yourself when you look in the mirror, no matter what, God is waiting there right now to be brought to life. But in a society that has so deeply demonized our bodies, this work, this resurrection, this encounter can be difficult. And so I believe that we should sit in the first simple task of listening. So let's breathe again and come back into our bodies. Breathe with me. What's going on in your body right now? Feel your feet and your seat again. Feel your breath. Do you notice anything different? Anything that's changed from last time? See again if you can get specific with the sensations, the emotions. And again, enter into the question, how is God moving through my body right now? Take a few breaths with that question. Maybe you had an answer, and maybe you didn't, and maybe you're really not sure, because what the hell is this body thing? That's okay. That's all okay. There are certainly times where I show up to this house of God and go through the motions without feeling the Spirit. But we know that faith requires practice. And so the point is to show up again next week, trusting that when we seek God, we will find her, or more likely she will find us. I think it's no different with the house of God that is our body. The point is that there is no way to rebuild the desecrated temple of our bodies except for going and praying inside of them again and again and again. Sometimes the way I feel God in my body is quiet and slow. Things like when I can feel my heartbeat, or when I can feel the sun on my skin, or when I feel exhausted contentment at the end of a day of work. Sometimes it's slow and quiet like that, but sometimes it's big, dramatic revelations. And one of those striking moments happened for me when I was a sophomore in college. I was reading a collection of essays by transgender people. And by transgender, I mean people whose genders do not match the one they were assigned at birth. And so I came across this story written by someone who was assigned male at birth, meaning the doctor said, this is a boy, it's a boy. But now, at the time of writing, this author was somewhere in between man and woman. And this was the first time I realized such a thing was possible. It had never even occurred to me that this could be an option. And I mean, I gotta be honest, I don't remember what the essay was about. I don't even remember the title or the author. But, but I do remember the way I immediately identified with that in-between self-defined gender. And I saw it alive in me. I saw a part of myself that I hadn't been able to recognize before suddenly come into clarity. I'd spent my entire childhood at war with my femininity. I tightly controlled every movement, every desire, every word, every expression. And here, solely by the fact of this author's existence, I found this unmistakably delicious and enthralling possibility of letting go of that fight, of surrendering to a ceasefire with my body, and letting it move through the world as it pleased. In a Community of the Word meeting where Allison was preparing her sermon, she described queerness in a way that I found so striking. She said, "Queerness is an invitation to be fully alive in the face of empire's death." And I just thought that was perfect. Alive. That's such, right? That's such an embodied word, alive. An invitation to be alive. And I thought what she said, I thought it so powerfully described the process of owning and defining your body in a world that has declared that body impossible. But the most important piece of what she said was framing queerness as an invitation. And that invitation is not just to people who have come to identify as queer. The important part is that it's an invitation to everyone. Queerness says the rules of this society were not made to serve our aliveness. And it pushes us, all of us, to feel into our bodies and ask honestly, what brings me to life? So let's breathe again. Take a breath in and out. As you breathe this time, I want to invite you to bring a memory into your body of a time when you were fully alive. A time when you felt a sense of possibility. See if you can coax that memory out of your mind, out of your brain, and into your body. All the way down into your feet. And notice how your body responds at the invitation to aliveness. Not just as something abstract, but as an invitation right now. Do you feel excited? Maybe you feel dread. Maybe you feel nothing. If you're feeling alive, turn it up a little bit. Just a few notches. If you want to smile or move your feet, you can do that. And see if you can let however your body responds to this. See if you can let that be a way that God is moving in you. So take a few more breaths and open your eyes. As we encounter the possibility of God in our bodies and move toward greater aliveness, as we do that, we also encounter our barriers. We encounter the things that make aliveness scary and the things that give us reasons for staying numb. A few summers ago, I was walking down 204th Street on my way home from the train. It was one of those really beautiful New York City summer nights. And all the fire hydrants were spraying, and there was music out of everybody's window. And it was like the time of night where it had just gotten cool enough for like everybody to be out and not in bed yet, right? So everyone is like on the sidewalk. And that also meant that it was cool enough for me to put my hair down. And so I, was like, feel myself a little bit. I had on big earrings and like bigger hair and little tiny shorts. And I was just, do my thing on the way back from the subway. And this man saw me and started catcalling me. And so I, did the usual. I just like kept my eyes ahead and started walking a little faster. But then as I got closer to him, he saw my gender. He realized that I wasn't the woman he had imagined I was. And so he started fake vomiting on the sidewalk and screaming to all the people around and pointing at me and saying, "I thought it was a woman. I thought it was a woman." And I, whatever, same reaction, just the usual. Eyes forward, walked home. This kind of incident and worse is a possibility for me whenever I leave my house. And for trans feminine people, meaning people like me who are assigned male at birth but are now something more feminine. For us, some of the most dangerous moments are when straight men hit on you and then realize you're trans. So like that man on 204th, they feel like their masculinity is being threatened and some gay stuff is going on, and they obviously feel a lot of shame, and you become the scapegoat for that shame. So getting to the point where I felt comfortable walking down the street presenting as feminine, that meant a lot of work excavating and unearthing the shame that other people had heaped upon me. And also the ways I had learned to weaponize that shame against myself. The weight of all that kept me hiding inside of masculinity for years. But the more I let my body imagine what it would feel like to be fully alive, to be whole in my queerness, the more I let my body feel those things, the less I could tolerate hiding. We know that prayer at some point must be met by action. And eventually it became clear that in order to have full access to my dignity, to my joy, to my creativity, to my power, in order really to have a full relationship with God, I would have to transition, meaning I would have to take my daydreams of femininity and gender nonconformity into reality. And so, that process took a whole bunch of crying and several very awkward trips to like women's clothing stores and whatever. But eventually, I was able to go out in public for the first time. And it was terrifying. And I wish I could point to some epiphany moment where I suddenly learned how to be in public and not scared. But that's just not the reality of being trans feminine in our society. The thing is, though, that queerness is not an invitation to safety. Queerness does not invite us to safety. Queerness invites us to aliveness. And the choice for me came down to my safety or my freedom. And so I had to choose my freedom. But the truth is, if we're being honest, that there are plenty of reasons to be numb. At many points in my life, it made a lot of sense not to listen to my body. There were times where my safety depended on repressing my queer desires. Queer or not, this is true for all of us in some way. In a world as violent as this, numbness can actually be a really smart survival strategy. Our numbness has taken care of a lot, and we need to recognize that. But at the same time as we recognize that, we have to hold a competing truth, and that truth is that the empire wants us numb. Matthew Fox writes that injustice is not an abstraction. It's about the draining away of joy and dignity and satisfaction concretely from people's lives. We know injustice because we feel it in our bodies. And the same is true of liberation. There is no strategy for liberation that is not informed by the direct experience of injustice, by the bodily knowledge of this is not right, the bodily experience of we deserve better. 2nd century bishop Saint Irenaeus writes that the glory of God is human beings fully alive. Saying that our bodies are made as temples is saying that we are made to be fully alive. And it's this inlaid aliveness, this pursuit of full living, that is the glory of God. And in this pursuit, we recognize the barriers to our aliveness. And in doing so, we name the injustices around us. And so the empire knows that if it can keep us numb, if it can keep us from pursuing our aliveness, it can keep us from pursuing our freedom. So if our numbness can be both a brilliant survival strategy and a weapon of empire, then what are we called to do? This, I believe, is where we are called into the choice of faith over fear, into the daily work of resurrection. As we more deeply feel our call to aliveness, as we take the time to pray again and again within the temples of our bodies, we begin to feel the places where we can let go, where we begin to feel the places where it is worth it to risk aliveness, where the benefits of numbness no longer outweigh the benefits of aliveness. There was one day where I was walking to the subway, feeling the weight of people's stares, and it was a bad day. I just couldn't bring myself to look anyone in the eye. I didn't want to see disgust staring back. I felt like I couldn't take that. And so I was just kind of looking down and so angry. And out of the anger, anger moves us to dignity. And out of the anger, I was like, this isn't the way I want to move through the world. And I found myself praying. I don't remember choosing to pray. I remember finding myself praying. And I asked God, I said, God, why did I do this again? Can you remind me why I decided to transition? And I knew instantly that the answer was in my body, that the answer was not something I could think. It was only something I could feel. And so I tried to rest into my dignity. I tried to fill my bones and my muscles and my tissues with this fierce belief that I am real and that I am possible. And I felt my heart rise to meet the world. I wasn't crouched. I felt the dignity of my spine. And I let myself meet the eyes of the people passing by. And I imagined in each set of eyes a little scared queer child. And I prayed that in witnessing my open public queerness, that each passerby may be a little more possible, maybe a little less afraid. And this is the best example I can give of praying in the temple of my body. I committed in that moment to do it as often as possible. So one last time, let's breathe and come into our bodies. Feel your feet, your back, your seat, your breath. Notice what's different from the first time we felt into our bodies this morning. And one final time, let your body respond to the question, how is God moving through my body right now? And we'll let that silence be our closing prayer. Amen.